Hello, Steve. Thank you. Let's start. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jagdishwar Reddy, and I'm from India. I'm in France since last 5 years. I'm a fashion designer. I have done my bachelor's in fashion designing, and since then I've been focusing on denim. And I did my master's in fashion and luxury goods management in France, and now I'm doing my doctorate in sustainable fashion business. So my core subject is developing the upcycling design techniques, particularly on denim. And the reason why I invited you is that I want the experts' opinions and comments on this particular subject. How can denim industry be a major play the major portion in sustainability and circular economy? So I have a couple of questions. So before we dive into it, I have done a lot of research about you before reaching you, but for my audience, I would highly appreciate if you could give a brief overview about you and the company you work for.
Okay, perfect. Yes. My name's Steve Maggard. I'm currently the president of Cone Denim. I've been with the company 30 years last December. Most of my experience was on the manufacturing side early in my career. I've worked as an expat in both Mexico and Nicaragua, running denim manufacturing facilities for about 10 or 11 years. I've been back in the States since 2010, and I'm in my current role. So Cone Denim is a 130-year-old denim company. Started in the United States by the Cone brothers, all that time ago. We currently have manufacturing in Mexico and China. We have two plants in Mexico. Each can produce about 28 million linear yards apiece. And then we have a plant in China that can produce that same amount of yardage. We have sales offices all over the world, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Italy, various places in the United States, Mexico, and then we have agents in Great Britain and Turkey and Japan and South Korea. And so we have a pretty much a global presence in the denim world. Our customers range from, the largest brands and retailers in the world. So we sell Abercrombie, Levi's, Wrangler, Lee, Ariat, Carhartt, Miller, Buckle, Guess, so we're very fortunate. Madewell, J. Crew. We're very fortunate to have a very diverse customer base, and it goes across an entire range of price points where we sell fabric that ends up in Walmart, and then we sell fabric that ends up in $1,200 selvage jeans made in Japan. So that's a little
Wow.
bit about myself and Cone Denim.
Right. So, as being a designer, particularly denim designer, a few of the names which you mentioned, it was my dream to work with them, but like, Wrangler and Levi's. Thank you for the introduction. My first question is that, since we are talking about the sustainability, particularly in denim, and I have seen your recent reports the company published about the sustainability and the level of your interest in being a sustainable, ethical manufacturer. But I just want to know what is that one area where you still face challenging to become a sustainable, like, just for example, in dyeing, there is the only way that to be in the retail is that the synthetic dyes. So is there any challenging step that you cannot avoid it in manufacturing, denim manufacturing?
The main thing that I have found is that a lot of the sustainable initiatives are just not economically viable right now. For example, you mentioned synthetic dye. We've ran quite a bit of samples with natural plant-based indigo for years, but the problem is it's three times higher cost than a normal fabric. And so, when you start moving from a $3.50 fabric up to $7, $8, $9, there's just not a lot of people that can afford to pay that. And I think there's a lot of people who have sustainable goals, but there are limits to what they're willing to pay for it. It's easy for a consumer to say, hey, I want to support the earth and support the environment, but then are you willing to pay double for your jeans? Most people are not. And so, again, there's options out there. I think the key for us is to find ways to be sustainable that do not inflate the cost of the fabric or the garment to an extreme extent. We have to find middle ground.
Okay. So why is it important? Like, consumer, of course, they want it to be sustainable, but sustainability comes with a price tag. So what else could we do? I have seen in your recent reports that you have come up with an initiative and about the HIG MSI. And why do you think it is important for the consumers or for a brand to be transparent with for the consumers?
I think there's a general distrust of business and consumers about, claims that are made and greenwashing and things of that nature. And unfortunately, a couple large companies have been caught greenwashing and not being able to justify their claims that they're making. And so I think, for going forward for sustainability, there's going to have to also be a traceability um, and documentation process that's going to be a key there, because you're going to have to be able to prove what you're saying. There's a general distrust from consumers. I think there's a general distrust from governments in some cases where they want to make sure that the claims are being made are true. And so I think that you can't have true sustainability without having traceability and documentation at the same time.
Yeah, true. Of course, I agree. So, what is your opinion on the concept of upcycling? Because my research talks about the upcycle design techniques, and this is the most recent revolution, let's say, that consumers are preferring, and there is a new market idea opening, particularly for the thrift brands who work on upcycling products. So there was in my idea, and which I was working since last couple of years, like if there are brands who focus on upcycling, like denim brands focusing on upcycling, like they collect the discarded material, they rebrand it and they resell it. So do you think this is a viable idea being a manufacturer? Because this might be challenging for the manufacturers because the need of consumer is being reduced by this type of concept. So what is your opinion, and how do you think this business idea could be competitive in the retail space?
I'm obviously in favor of it. I think that some of the challenges are going to be to find a way to make it at scale. Um, there's people who are doing upcycling and are making garments, and designers who are making beautiful things out of um, recycling old textiles and making them new again and things of that nature. But I don't know of anybody that's doing it at a large scale where they're making millions of garments a year doing that. I think that the upcycling process has challenges as far as, the garments that are coming in are different shades, they're different strengths, they're different sizes. And so it requires quite a bit more manual manipulation to be able to do that. So I think, again, I applaud the efforts. I haven't seen a lot of success bringing it to scale. I think the challenge is going to be to find a way to make it to scale. I think that the thrift stores and, people reselling garments and reusing them is probably a little bit more of a viable business model short term because it can be scaled easier. I've also seen some discussions about almost renting clothes where there's businesses that take in old clothing and then you can rent it or borrow it for a cost, almost like a subscription where you're renting a movie or something like that. You know, I think that could have some potential as well when you see um, some of these businesses now where they offer to style for you and they send you, you know, new garments every couple of weeks through the mail and then you keep what you want and things of that nature. I think if they could incorporate used garments or upcycled garments into that, that could be very, very powerful as well. But it would still have it would still have challenges. My opinion, and I don't want to change gears. I think there's some other options on recycling and getting some sustainability through recycling that could be more volume successful or launched at bigger levels. And we can talk about that when you're ready.
Sure. So, is there any chance that manufacturers like you could adapt this model, like, a good collaboration between the manufacturer, designer, and a retailer? Is there a chance that upcycling be into a traditional supply chain of denim?
I think it would be hard to incorporate upcycling. And when I'm saying upcycling, I'm talking about taking existing garments and making them into new, different existing garments. That to me is upcycling in my vocabulary. Um, I think that would be very difficult for a denim mill to do because we make fabric. I think it could be possible for cut and sews or laundries, as far as or textile companies that are fully vertical to do upcycling in their manufacturing of the actual garments. But putting it using fabric back and making it into other fabric without tearing it down into fiber form is going to be very, very difficult for the actual denim makers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So my other question is that, where do you see the concept of thrifting and upcycling as a upcoming business model that in next 10 to 20 years, do you think there might be a potential growth? Of course, they might not be the competitor for the traditional retail business, but do you think it still has space and future?
I think it does have future in space as the world becomes more and more populated and resources become fewer and fewer. I think that it's going to be something that people are looking at. For it to truly be something that gains traction in the short term, I think it's going to require government mandates
Yeah,
where, you know, European Union or California, somebody comes in and says X% of all garments sold in retail must be upcycled.
yeah.
So that has a way of forcing people's hands. And if it's a requirement, then they'll be forced to pay more and things of that nature. But doing it on a voluntary basis, I think, is going to be difficult. Again, I think there's some ways you can approach sustainability and reuse garments in a more cost-effective manner that's not necessarily upcycling, that has more potential short term to be expanded out into a larger scale.
Okay,
But
coming back. Yeah,
even
sorry.
that has its challenges.
Yeah, of course, of course. Anything comes with both advantages and challenges. So, Coming back to the Cone Denims, what are the recent sustainable challenges and changes you have made under your presidency? And what is that one sustainable change you are very proud of?
The biggest things we've really focused on three things. One is traceability of raw materials. So we use a testing company called Oratane, which can prove to a legal certainty where the cotton that we buy was grown. And we can prove that it was not grown in, restricted growth regions, where there's forced labor or things of that nature. And I think that's very important. So that's more of a traceability, but I also link it to sustainability. The other thing we have really focused on is water savings as a company.
So
And we've
maintain.
done that a couple different ways, is looking for alternative dyeing and finishing methods. For example, we have ozone finishing now that uses, 60, 70, 80% less water than traditional finishing. And we're moving more in that direction as far as finishing. We do a lot also. We've invested a lot in water recovery. We have a zero liquid discharge plant in Mexico that uses reverse osmosis to recycle our water, and that has reduced our water consumption by, like 100,000 or I think it's like a million, a little more than a million gallons a year at that one facility. And so that's something we're very proud of. Now, it's expensive. It might add 4, 5, 6 cents a yard to your denim cost, which doesn't sound like a lot, but most customers are not willing to pay for that. So water savings is the next one. And then we've done quite a bit of work using recycled cotton. And that is, to some extent, it's post-consumer, but post-consumer recycling has some significant challenges as far as contamination and getting buttons removed and zippers removed, and the thread is not cotton. You can't recycle anything that's got lycra in it. And so post-consumer is much more difficult. We can do it, but it's more expensive. But we've done quite a bit of work with post-industrial recycling, where we're taking the fabric scraps from the cut and sew customers that we have, or even our internal processing. We're garnetting that back up into the cotton fiber and reusing that fiber. So we have a couple products in China that are 100% recycled cotton. It's no virgin cotton used at all. And then we have multiple other styles that are 20, 30% recycled cotton as well. And we're seeing that really gain traction. There's a lot of customers who are requiring a certain percentage of recycled cotton be included in any fabric that we offer them. So that is something that I think will keep fabric out of landfills and things of that nature, and allow us to reach some of the sustainability goals that don't have the complexities that would prevent scaling that either post-consumer would have or even upcycling would have.
Oh, wow. That's very good. You have given me more than what I've expected. You have done a fantastic job. But just to add to this question, when I totally forget to add it to the questionnaire, but where do you source your raw material from? You said you have ethical suppliers. I don't know whether you have suppliers or you have your own production in terms of cotton.
No, we do not grow our own cotton. I would say in Mexico, in our Mexican plants, I'd say it's probably 80% US cotton, and the balance would be Mexican cotton. But we're in the process of transitioning over to 100% US cotton in Mexico, because we have a couple large customers that are requiring that. And then in China, we use US, Brazilian, and Australian cotton. We do not use any Chinese cotton because some of that crop has been associated with forced labor in the Uyghur situation in certain regions, and we've just decided not to use any Chinese cotton at all to prevent the risk of mixing.
Yeah. So coming to the China, I have to add one more question here. So how is it difficult? Is it difficult or hard to be in business with the Chinese competitors? Because I also had an opportunity to discuss a manufacturer from China, and their speed, their price, keeping aside the sustainability, is faster, cheaper, and advanced. So how do you think you could be able to be what I mean to say that how can you be able to keep the sustainability and still be in business with this type of competition?
Well, the main issue that we battle is if it's a Chinese mill that is selling to a non-US or a non-European retailer, then they can still use the forced labor cotton. They can use the Chinese cotton, which is significantly cheaper. There are also mills in China that have government subsidized electricity and water and steam and things of that nature. So we honestly have not been very successful competing in the China domestic market. Where we're having success is into the making it in China, but it going into Europe or to the US. And our customers are willing to pay a little bit more because of our name and the fact that they know we're doing testing and that we're not going to cut any corners and get them in trouble with pollution or using the incorrect cotton, things of that nature. So it's very, very difficult to compete on price and still be sustainable. Because again, we spend millions of dollars treating water every year. We spend millions of dollars. We have a solar facility on our plant in China. The entire roof is covered with solar panels. We spend a lot of money on Oratane and Higg index and audits and U.S. cotton trust protocol. And so we spend a lot of money to verify the claims that we're making.
Mhm. And what about I think, is it your benefit? Do you only have the mill in USA, or do you have any mill abroad?
All that we have in the U.S. is our corporate office. So we have 3 mills, 2 in Mexico, 1 in China. So we do no manufacturing in the U.S. All that we have in the U.S. are sales offices and our corporate office.
Okay. So, what is your comment on the recent tariff wars? I think retail is one of the major industry which is being suffering. So, do you have any comments on this?
I mean, it's obviously something we're looking at very seriously. Right now, Mexico is really the only country in the world that doesn't have a tariff coming into the United States because of the USMCA. And so we're very optimistic that that's going to help our business in Mexico. We're obviously keeping a very close eye on the discussions right now with, China and Cambodia and Sri Lanka and Vietnam and Bangladesh, which is where most of our Chinese fabric is actually cut and made into garments. So we're obviously concerned. We're obviously keeping a close eye on it. But it's the same thing that all of our competitors are going to have to face as well. It's not just us. And so, we just have to see what the tariffs are and how they're worded, and then, find the best way to work with those.
Okay. So, my final and last question is that what is your recommendation for the future entrepreneurs who want to get into the denim industry? And what are the recommendations for yourself to make yourself more sustainable? I'm sure that you have told me what are the challenges and what are the steps you already took, but what are your recommendations for the future entrepreneurs to get into the industry, and what are your recommendations for the Cone Denim for next 5 to 10 years?
I think that the key thing for people getting in the industry is determine what country you want to be manufacturing in, and where you should be in the next 5 to 10 years. It's changing constantly. Um, Certain countries are getting more expensive. They're getting more difficult to work in as far as, government relations and things of that nature, political stability. There's other countries that are up and coming and that are, offering incentives and lower costs and things of that nature. So, pick where you're going to be, decide where you're going to operate in or where you're going to purchase from, and consider not just cost, but political stability and currency fluctuations, how stable the government is, et cetera. So that's the main thing. I also think you're going to have to be transparent and traceable. My advice is as you're setting up your business, you're going to have third-party auditors and things of that nature that will document the claims that you're making. I think overall, if the industry could agree upon what audits or what certifications they're going to require versus having 15 or 20 different audits that are going on. Right now we're having to pay for multiple different audits to be done that basically measure the same thing. But, customer A wants this audit and customer B wants this other audit, and some people want HIG and some people want BCI and some people want, if the industry as a whole could just agree, this is the testing that we want, this is the audits that we are all going to get behind, then that would allow the industry to do less audits,
Save a lot of money and time.
but save money and time. But at the same, when I say less audits, I'm not saying less focus on things. I'm just saying don't do the same audit 5 times just because it's a different name on the audit company. So that gets very, very expensive. And so, I would love to see the big retailers of the world get together and agree. For Cone, I think we just have to keep doing what we're doing. We're not the cheapest. We're not the least expensive. We have to differentiate ourselves and give people a reason to pay a little bit more for fabric. And I just think that the traceability, we've got to stay on the cutting edge of what's new. Whether that's new testing, whether it's new documentation, whether it's new finishing technology, new dyeing technology, less water, less greenhouse gas emissions, more certifications. We just have to stay constantly alert and working toward staying at the top of the heap, for example.
Okay. So that's it from my end. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I never expected before writing you an email, I was like thinking twice that, he's a big guy, president for a big company. Would he care to reply to my email? But I was surprised seeing your response and I was like over the moon instantly. I prepared. I'm sorry, some of the questions were out of context, but thank you for being patient with me. So this interview will definitely help me to cite you in my research paper, and my supervisor is more into like primary evidences of industry experts. So your interview will be one of the 5 interviewers, which I'm going to talk. You was the first, and tomorrow I have one more. So thank you very much. Just stay with me. I'll take 2 to 3 more minutes, but let me off the recording.
Okay.